So let's start the action now. The first thing that I want to show you is the pause containers. I cannot get inside of the pause containers. I can just show you that it is running, and you should never do anything with the pause containers because it controls the communication or the network communication of the containers in the pods where the pause container is running. So let us go ahead and see. I'm in the master node, and these are the three pods that are running. K8 is pods intro 1, K8 is pods intro 2, and K8 is pods with nodes. Pods intro 1 has two containers running. Pods intro 2 has one, and the other one and the third pod has two containers running in it. So essentially, we should have three pause containers for all of these three pods. Now, how do you see the pause containers? The first thing you have to remember that pause containers would run where you are running the pods. So the pods are running in the worker nodes. So we should go ahead and see the pause containers in the worker nodes. All the three pods are running in two workers. Pods intro 1 and 2 are running on worker node 1, and K8 is pods with nodes is running with worker node 2. Now currently I'm in worker node 1. To see the pause container, we cannot go inside of the pod, because if you go inside of the pod, we will not see any of the containers. And even if we do a describe of the pods, we cannot see the pause containers because that is a system container. So there is no command provided in kubectl to see the pause containers, because of course it's a system container. So the way to see is using docker container command. You know that we have a command in Docker which can be used to see all the running containers. And the command is sudo docker container ls. And I'm in the worker node 1, and here if you see, so many containers are running. Now the first container which you see, which is this one, is the HTTP web page container, which is running in K8s pods intro 1. The second container, which is running HTTP web page container, this is also HTTP web page container, but this is running in K8s pods intro 2. The third container is K8s EKS GKE, which is the Python application, and it should run only in one pod, which is K8s pods intro 1. So the first three containers are the containers which are running in pod, and we can see the output using docker command, because at the end of the day, these are all Docker containers. And after that, there are a few containers. And this one, if you see, it's a pause container. This is also another pause container, and there are other pause containers also. So let us see the first pause container, which is this one, pause 3.1. And this container is running in K8s pods intro 2 pod. Then we have one more pause container, exact same, but it is running in K8s pods intro 2 pod. So as we have two pods running in this worker node, we have two pause containers. And there are some other pause and non-pause containers which I'll discuss shortly. But let us go ahead and see in worker node 2. And this is worker node 2. Run the same sudo docker command. You have to run it using sudo because it might fail, or you might get permission error if you run only with docker. All right. Now here also we have one container which is deepcloud2208 HTTP web page, and it is running in K8s pods with nodes pod. And the same pod, K8s pods with nodes, is running one more container which is K8s EKS GK. This is the Python application. And at the same time, we have a pause container running in the same pod, K8s pods with nodes. So this is what I was trying to say, that for each pod, you'll have a pause container running, which will handle the network communication of the containers within that particular pod. If you deploy n number of containers in any pod, it'll contain n plus one container, one of them being the pause container. Now, what are these other containers that you see? So before discussing this, let me go to the master node. So I'm at master node and I have not run any docker container ls command here. Let us go ahead and run that. And the master node also has so many containers running. Now let us go through each of these containers one by one. The first thing is kubeflannel. This is a container for kubeflannel, and there's one more container for kubeflannel. If you remember, we had installed a Flannel network plugin to facilitate the network communication across pods and nodes, or basically across master and worker nodes. So these two containers are for those Flannel network plugin. Then there's something called kubeproxy, which we'll discuss later on in detail. So there are some other containers which are also running, and interestingly enough, if you notice, we have a container with API server, and there should be a POS container for this one also. There's a controller manager container also. There's a kube scheduler container as well. We have a POS container for the scheduler pod. We have another POS container for API server, and we have another POS container for HCD. So what does it tell you is that essentially all the components that we have discussed in the master node, starting from API server, controller, scheduler, and HCD, which is the metadata storage for the master node, all of them run as pods in the master node. And not only that, the network plugin which you have installed, that is Flannel, that also run as pod in the master node along with other nodes also. So that's why you are seeing so many POS containers in the master node itself. As we have so many pods for API server, scheduler, controller manager, and HCD, all of them have their own POS container. Now, if I go to the worker node, which is this one, we have the same thing for the worker nodes also. Now, worker nodes do not have API server or scheduler or control manager. We have a pod running for the Flannel network plugin. We have another pod running for kubeproxy, and that's it. Now for that, you have POS container for kubeproxy and POS container for the Flannel network plugin, which is running in this worker. Similarly, you'll get the same number of pods and containers running in the other worker also. If you just want to see the POS container, you have to filter it using grep. So if you see, we have the first POS container for k8s pods intro 2. The second POS container is for k8s pods intro 1 pod. The third POS container is for kubeproxy. Fourth and fifth are for kubeflannel. Similarly, we have POS container running for k8s pods with nodes pod, and there's two more POS containers for core DNS, which we'll discuss later on. Then you have POS containers for kubeproxy and kubeflannel in the other worker node. Now currently I'm running this in worker 2. Check that in master. So the first one is for kubeproxy. This is the first POS container for kubeproxy. The second POS container is for kubeflannel. Same is the case with third POS container. Fourth is for controller, then scheduler, and then API server. And then the final one is for HCD. So these are all system containers. As I was saying, POS containers handle the network communication for all of your pods. So by exploring POS containers, we have also seen that all the components in the master node and worker nodes run as Kubernetes pods only. Be it API server, scheduler, controller manager, HCD, key value store, network plugin, kubeproxy, whatever it is, all those components run as Kubernetes pods in the nodes of the Kubernetes cluster.